Imagine surviving a war and realizing that was the worst possible outcome. When Rome conquered a city, men often died quickly, but for women, death was rarely the plan. They were counted, sorted, priced. Within days, tens of thousands of women could vanish, names erased, languages forbidden, families dissolved, processed through a system so efficient it looked less like violence and more like administration. This isn't a story about chaos or battlefield cruelty. It's about what happened after the fighting stopped. Because Rome didn't just conquer cities, it built an empire by turning survival itself into a punishment. Stay with me. By the end of this story, you'll understand why, for many women, death was the only thing Rome couldn't take away. The city does not fall all at once. It collapses in layers. First, the walls go quiet. The shouting from the ramparts fades, replaced by smoke and the dull crackle of burning wood. Then the screams begin, distant at first, echoing through streets you've walked since childhood. By the third day, they are no longer echoes. They are right outside your door. You are in your home, the same rooms where you learned to walk, where you were married, where your children were born. The stone floor is cold beneath your feet. You have been awake for 2 nights, listening, counting breaths, waiting for something that has already happened. Your husband left a week ago to defend the walls. He has not returned. You already understand what that means. Your 12-year-old son is hiding in the cellar. You put him there yourself. You told him not to move, not to cry, not to make a sound no matter what he heard. You told him that silence could save him. Then the door breaks, not with rage, not with shouting. It breaks efficiently. 3 Roman soldiers step inside. They move like men following instructions, not emotions. One grabs your arm without looking at your face. Another moves through the house, opening chests, checking corners. The third walks straight to the cellar door. You hear your son scream your name. It is the last time you will ever hear his voice. They drag you into the street. You are not alone. Women stand everywhere, some kneeling, some frozen, some already bleeding. Faces you recognize: the baker's wife, the priest's daughter, the neighbor who greeted you every morning. No one meets anyone else's eyes. Everyone understands what has begun. An officer walks among you with a wax tablet. He does not ask names. He does not listen to pleas. He looks at mouths, arms, hips. He presses fingers into flesh, testing strength, testing endurance. Numbers appear on the tablet. Marks are made. This is not chaos. This is inventory. Her name is Alyssa. At least, that is what her mother called her. Standing in the square, Watching smoke rise from her city, she still believes the worst part is over. The fighting has stopped. The screams are fading. Survival feels possible. She is wrong. What is happening here has happened before, in Corinth, in Jerusalem, in Carthage, in hundreds of cities that believed resistance meant dignity. Rome did not invent this moment. It perfected it. Because Rome could not survive without conquest. It was not ideology. It was arithmetic. Rome's fields, mines, roads, aqueducts, and estates ran on human bodies. When bodies broke, they were replaced. Men died quickly in war. Women did not. Women were too valuable. So Rome built a system. When a city fell, the first step was separation. Boys over 12 were removed and eliminated, methodically, not in rage, but in groups. Rome had learned what leaving them alive meant 20 years later. Women were treated differently. They were processed. Alyssa stands in line for hours as the sun moves across the sky. When her turn comes, an officer grips her jaw and turns her head. He opens her mouth to count her teeth. He squeezes her arms and shoulders. He writes 2 words on the tablet: prima forma, first quality. She does not understand Latin. She does not know that these words mean her suffering will last longer. Roman records from Carthage list thousands of women categorized this way: young, healthy, valuable, each assigned a number, each assigned a price. Human lives reduced to ledger entries. Within 6 days, over 50,000 people are processed. 25,000 of them are women, not captured, processed. 3 days later, Alyssa walks up a wooden plank onto a ship. Her wrists are raw where rope has cut into skin. The harbor is filled with shouting, smoke, and movement. Ships line the docks, designed not for grain or oil, but for people. These are not ordinary vessels. Archaeological evidence shows ventilation shafts, drainage channels, water access systems built directly into the holds. Floating prisons designed to keep human cargo alive across long voyages. Below deck, the air is thick and warm. Dozens of women press against the walls. No one speaks. Speaking wastes energy. Food arrives once a day. Not enough. Never enough. Scarcity is deliberate. Hunger keeps people weak. Competition keeps them divided. By the 3rd week, Alyssa stops counting days. By the 4th, she stops remembering faces. Mortality during transport averages 15%. 1 in 7 women never arrives. Those who die are recorded and discarded. Same column as spoiled supplies. When the ship reaches Ostia, Alyssa is alive. And that is when the worst part begins. When the ship finally docks, no one cheers. There is no sense of arrival, no relief. The port of Ostia smells of salt, oil, rot, and something heavier, fear, that has settled into the wood itself. Alyssa steps onto Roman soil after 26 days at sea, her legs shaking, her wrists infected where the rope rubbed them raw. She expects the worst is behind her. She is wrong again. The women are herded into holding enclosures near the harbor, wooden pens surrounded by guards. No shouting. No violence unless necessary. Rome does not need chaos here. Efficiency matters more. The first thing they do is destroy what remains of the past. Alyssa is stripped of her Carthaginian clothes, not torn off in anger, but removed methodically. She watches the fabric curl and blacken, the last physical proof of where she came from reduced to ash. Then they give her a tunic, plain, undyed, identical to hundreds of others. It is not clothing. It is a label. She is washed, fed, just enough to dull the sharpest edge of starvation. Oil is rubbed into her skin to make it shine under the sun. Roman dealers know how appearance affects price. A body that looks healthy sells better. Another inspection follows. A man examines her like livestock. He checks teeth again. Fingers press into her stomach, her hips. He looks for scars, deformities, anything that might lower value. He nods when he finishes. No words are exchanged. She is acceptable. Then she is moved to the market. The slave market at Ostia is not hidden. It is not secret. It is a permanent structure, openly operating under Roman law. The sound hits first, shouting, bargaining, laughter. Human voices reduced to noise. The auction block is a raised wooden platform in the center of the market. Alyssa is pushed onto it with several others. A dealer grabs her arm and lifts it, showing muscle tone to the crowd. He opens her mouth and announces her age, her origin, her condition in rapid Latin. Buyers shout questions. Where is she from? Is she trained? Is she fertile? The answers do not matter as much as the assumption. The bidding begins. 15 silver coins, 18, 22. Alyssa does not understand the numbers, but she understands the sound of ownership changing hands. When the bidding stops at 28 silver coins, a man in expensive robes steps forward. He hands over the money. A receipt is written, a transaction completed. No ceremony, no acknowledgement. Alyssa is handed over like furniture. The man who bought her does not look cruel. He does not look kind either. He looks like someone who has acquired something useful, an investment, a tool. He never asks her name. That night, she is given a new one, Tertia III. She is the third slave purchased that week. Her real name is not forbidden immediately. Rome understands transition, but anyone who calls her Alyssa is corrected, then punished. Slowly, people stop saying it. Eventually, she does too. The erasure continues. Her hair is shaved on the second day, not as punishment, just procedure. It is easier to shave everyone than to inspect for lice. Dark strands fall to the floor. The same hair her mother used to braid when she was a child, gone in minutes. Then comes language. She is forbidden from speaking Punic. Other Carthaginian slaves in the household are kept separate. Rome knows shared language preserves memory, so it removes it. Religion follows. A small amulet hidden in her tunic is discovered and destroyed. She is told Roman gods protect this house now, that she will honor them or face consequences. No argument is permitted. But the most effective stage comes last: memory. Tertia is forbidden from speaking about Carthage, about her husband, about her son. At first, she resists internally, replaying faces and voices in her mind at night. She clings to them desperately, afraid that forgetting will mean betrayal. Years pass. The memories fade. She tries to picture her son's face and finds only blur. She tries to remember her husband's voice and hears nothing. After 6 years, she realizes she has stopped trying. Some women are sent away during this period. Specialized facilities. Archaeological evidence reveals buildings with small rooms, restraints, drainage systems. Roman records call it transformation. Programs lasting months, designed to ensure obedience, pregnancy, compliance. Children born from these unions belong to Rome. Some are raised as Romans. Others do not survive infancy if they resemble their mothers too closely. The system does not allow reminders. This is not incidental cruelty. It is policy. Rome does not want slaves who remember freedom. It wants slaves who believe slavery is all that has ever existed. Terso falls. Tertia barely remembers Elisa. The girl who lived by the sea feels like a dream, something that happened to someone else. And this is where the truth becomes unbearable. Rome did not do this because Romans were uniquely evil. Okay? They did it because they needed to. At its height, up to 40% of Italy's population were slaves. Rome itself held hundreds of thousands. Agriculture, mining, construction, all depended on bodies that could be used up and replaced. Slaves died, aged, broke, and Rome needed more. Every decade without conquest meant fewer slaves. Fewer slaves meant agricultural collapse. Collapse meant hungry legions. Hungry legions meant political chaos. So Rome conquered again and again, and every conquest fed the same machine. Tertia is one of 30,000, a number, a line in a ledger. Her fate is unknown, but the system that consumed her is not. Rome did not need to conquer every city by force. Fear traveled faster than legions ever could. News of what happened after conquest moved along trade routes, through ports and mountain passes, whispered in markets, and spoken quietly in kitchens. People did not need to see Rome to understand it. They only needed to hear the stories. Cities that had never faced a Roman army began to change. Communities across the Mediterranean started building with a new priority in mind: hiding women. Homes were redesigned with false walls and concealed cellars. Villages carved tunnels into hillsides. Networks of caves were prepared in advance, stocked with food and water, meant to disappear entire families at a moment's notice. Archaeological evidence confirms these shelters across former Roman provinces, from Britain to North Africa. Entire settlements organized themselves around the expectation of Roman arrival. That alone tells you everything. Fear became infrastructure. Parents marked their daughters' faces deliberately, scarring them to make them less attractive to Roman raiders searching for premium merchandise. Marriage customs shifted. Some societies arranged marriages earlier, believing pregnancy might reduce a woman's value in the markets. Others went further. They prepared for death. When the city of Numantia fell in 133 BC, the women did not wait to be processed. They threw themselves from the walls. They walked into burning buildings. They chose fire over the ships. Roman historians called it madness. It was not. These women had heard the stories. They knew what waited in the harbors, in Ostia, in the markets, in the transformation facilities. They understood the arithmetic. Survival did not mean life. It meant erasure. Death was the only freedom Rome could not take. This pattern repeated across Spain, Gaul, Judea, and the Greek world. As Roman methods became known, resistance changed shape. Some cities surrendered immediately, hoping compliance might soften Rome's hand. Others resisted to the end, knowing the cost. Either way, neither choice offered safety. Because Rome's system did not depend on rebellion. It depended on demand. Slavery was not a byproduct of conquest. It was the reason for it. Roman estates required constant labor. Mines consumed bodies at a brutal pace. Construction projects devoured lives. Slaves aged, broke, died. Natural reproduction was not enough to sustain the system. It never had been. So Rome needed new supplies. Fresh conquests meant fresh bodies, and women were the most valuable category of all. They produced labor. They produced children. They extended the system forward in time. Rome did not see this as cruelty. It saw it as stability. This is why Roman records are so disturbingly precise. Numbers, categories, prices, mortality rates, acceptable losses, everything quantified. 1 out of 7 dying in transport was acceptable. A percentage, a margin, names did not matter. By the 1st century AD, entire regions lived under the shadow of this knowledge. Their reshaped daily life. Communities planned escapes that might never come. Mothers taught daughters how to stay silent, how to disappear, to die quickly if necessary. New words entered languages to describe Roman methods of cruelty. Concepts that had not existed before required names. Now, when language adapts, it is because reality has changed. And Rome noticed the effect. Fear worked. Cities surrendered faster. Resistance weakened. Tribute flowed. The machine fed itself. Trauma does not vanish when conquest ends. It embeds itself. It passes from one generation to the next. Even after Rome withdrew or collapsed, the patterns remained. The hiding places were still there. The warnings still whispered. Long after Rome stopped conquering, people still behaved as if it might return tomorrow. This was Rome's true legacy, not roads, not aqueducts, not law, fear. A fear so pervasive, it rewrote how societies organized themselves, how families raised children, how women calculated their futures. For Rome, the system worked perfectly. For everyone else, it meant living with the constant knowledge that civilization itself could become a machine designed to erase you. And for the women who survived, those who reached the markets, the villas, the estate's survival brought a different kind of death. They lived, but as someone else. Alyssa became Tirsha. Tirsha became a function. A function became routine. And routine became normal. This normalization was the final victory. When suffering becomes ordinary, resistance becomes unthinkable. By the time Rome's borders stabilized and its conquests slowed, the damage was already done. The economy faltered when new slaves stopped flowing in. Prices rose. Agriculture strained. The empire began shifting toward different systems of bound labor. But the memory of how Rome had fed itself never disappeared. It lingered in ruins, in tunnels, in the stories mothers told daughters at night. And it leads us to the final truth, the one Rome never intended anyone to notice. The women who survived Rome's system did not simply vanish. They were absorbed. Their bloodlines continued. Their bodies worked. Their children lived. But their identities were gone. That was the final stage, not conquest, not enslavement, assimilation. Rome did not need to remember the women it took. That was the final cruelty. Once the auctions ended and the receipts were written, the system moved on. New wars meant new captives. New bodies replaced old ones. The machine never paused long enough to look back. For the women who survived long enough to be absorbed into Roman households, life did not end. It narrowed. Days became routines. Routines became obedience. Obedience became identity. Alyssa no longer existed. Tirsha woke before dawn to prepare food she would never eat first. She cleaned floors she did not own, raised children who would never call her mother, and slept where she was told. No chains were required. Chains were inefficient. Habituation worked better. She learned Roman customs not because she was forced, but because refusing them made life harder. She learned when to speak and when silence was safer. She learned which memories to keep hidden and which to let dissolve. Rome rewarded compliance subtly. Better food, lighter work, fewer beatings. Sometimes freedom, years later, when age made her no longer useful as labor or reproduction. Freedom in a city where she knew no one and nothing. By the time emancipation came, if it came at all, there was nothing left to return to. Carthage was gone, her language forgotten, her family erased. Freedom arrived as a technicality, not a restoration. This is why Rome preferred women alive. Dead enemies inspired hatred. Living ones erased themselves. Children born to enslaved women became Roman property by default. They grew up speaking Latin, worshiping Roman gods, memorizing Roman history. Their mothers' pasts were not discussed. Silence was enforced not by law, but by convenience. It was easier not to ask, and so bloodlines continued without memory. This was not accidental. Rome understood that identity survives through repetition, names spoken, stories told, rituals performed. Remove those, and identity collapses within a generation. Assimilation finished what conquest began. By the time Roman expansion slowed in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the system faced a problem it had never solved: replacement. Slave prices rose sharply, estates struggled, mines emptied faster than they could be refilled. The empire began binding free farmers to land instead, inventing new forms of dependency to replace the old ones. The machine adapted, but the damage was already irreversible. Entire regions had been hollowed out. Generations lived with inherited fear. Communities were shaped by avoidance, not ambition. The trauma Rome created did not vanish with its borders. It lingered. The tunnels remained under houses. The caves stayed stocked long after the legions withdrew. Parents continued teaching children how to disappear. Fear outlived the empire. Historians often celebrate Rome's engineering, its law, its discipline. Roads still stretch across Europe. Aqueducts still stand. Latin still echoes in modern languages. But beneath all of it lies a quieter foundation: silence. The silence of women whose names were never recorded, whose lives were summarized in numbers, whose entire existence was worth a line on a wax tablet and a handful of silver coins. 30,000 women after one conquest, hundreds of thousands across centuries. The system worked because it was normalized, because it was legal, because it was ordinary. That is the most disturbing truth of all. Rome did not need monsters to do this. It needed clerks, accountants, officers following procedure. It needed people who believed stability justified everything. Whatever happened to Tirsha, the records do not say. She may have lived a long life in service to a Roman family. She may have died young from disease or exhaustion. She may have been freed and lived quietly on the margins of a city that was never hers. We do not know, and Rome did not care. What matters is that she existed, that she had a name before it was taken, a family before it was erased, a life before Rome decided it could be converted into value. And she was not alone. Carthage, Corinth, Jerusalem, Numantia, hundreds of cities, hundreds of thousands of women fed into the same system that never stopped, never questioned itself, and never apologized. This was the hidden industry of the Roman Empire. Not an accident of war, not a footnote, a foundation. So the next time you see Rome praised as the cradle of civilization, remember what that civilization was built on. Remember the ships designed for human cargo, the markets where people were sold like furniture, the laws that made it all respectable. And remember this: Rome did not just conquer land, it consumed people. If this story reached you, don't let it disappear again. We uncover the chapter's history tried to erase because silence is not forgetting, and forgetting is not innocence. The past isn't gone.